So as people are arriving into our forum, let me welcome you all. You're all very welcome indeed to our digital launch of Living the Camino Back Home by Brendan McManus and Katherine O'Flynn. My name is Carolanne Henry from Messenger Publications. We're publishers of the book and hosts for this evening's event. So I'll just give you a quick rundown on the format for this evening. I'll briefly introduce our two authors and our special guest. Turlough then will address us for about 15 minutes. Following that, we'll have a Q&A session, question and answer with Brendan and Katherine. And just on that, here's how you can bring your questions to the forum. You'll probably see many of us, but not all of us, will be familiar with the online kind of platform for these events. But just to remind you, you'll see as you come in, probably at the bottom of your screen, the chat button. So you can type in a question if you have one there. And we'll be taking a look at those during the course of the evening. And the second half of our event, then Brendan and Katherine will address those questions for us. And hopefully we'll have an interesting discussion about the themes and situations in the book. So finally, we're recording this, and in a couple of days when it comes through, I will send the recording to all of the attendees. So, excuse me, introductions. First of all, our authors. Well, Brendan McManus is a Jesuit priest. He works as a spiritual director and retreat giver, currently in Manresa Spirituality Centre in Dublin, and prior to that in Belfast in the Jesuit Centre there. He's published many books with Messenger Publications, some on the Camino, others on Ignatian spirituality, many in fact combining the two. I'd go so far as to say is Brendan is probably our most prolific author, and for that we're very glad. Thank you. Recent publications of his include Brothers in Arms, Channeling the Inner Fire, The Way to Manresa, and co-authored with Jim Deeds. He's written Discover God Daily and the award-winning trilogy Finding God in the Mess, Deeper into the Mess, and just published earlier this year, Emerging from the Mess. Katherine O'Flynn is a member of the Faithful Companions of Jesus Sisters, the FCJs. She trained as a psychotherapist at the Gregorian University in Rome and has worked in Ireland and the UK as a formator and a facilitator. Katherine now works as a volunteer with the Camino Companions, an organisation set up by the FCJ to welcome pilgrims to Santiago, offering them an opportunity to reflect on the experience and the meaning of their pilgrimage. And our special guest speaker for this evening is Turlough O'Donnell. Turlough has had a long and wide-ranging career in the legal profession, during which he worked first as a barrister at law and subsequently a senior counsel with the Bar of Ireland. He is an accredited mediator and has extensive experience across many areas of legal mediation. Turlough has also vast experience in the area of facilitation. He facilitated discussions between An Post and the Irish Postmasters Association. He also facilitated discussions between the GAA and the Gaelic Players Association, among others. So he's kept heady company in the world of facilitation. Not content with a busy career in law, mediation and facilitation, Turlough has vast experience on a wide range of boards and committees, including the General Council of the Bar of Ireland, Temple Street Children's Hospital, the Glencree Centre for Peace and Reconciliation, and, of course, most significantly for our purposes tonight, the Camino Society of Ireland. So we're delighted to have Turlough O'Donnell as our special guest this evening. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Turlough and leave you in his capable hands. Turlough.
Thank you very much, Carolanne, and thank you for this honour, Brendan and Katherine and Carolanne, to help to launch Living the Camino Back Home. Katherine and Brendan are experienced caminantes, and this is added to by their experience working in Room 6 at the Pilgrim's Office in Santiago, which is the heartland of Camino companions. This book will make an enormous contribution to caminantes and potential caminantes and pilgrims all over the world. And welcome to everybody from all over the world, all parts arriving here to work together to launch the book. The authors deal briefly with the motivation for pilgrimage, having first of all used Noreen E. Whaley's account of the spiritual tour of one part of the Santiago Cathedral, which is useful. They set out that motivation may be for many reasons. It may be due to a life transition phase. It may be due to major loss, a promise made, a search for meaning. But crucially, they point out that motives may change in the course of the Camino. And this is the point. You may go for one reason and find that the reason has changed or is changing. And insofar as motivation suggests you know where you're going, and I think myself that that's not helpful at all. We know what we want to get away from. That's motivation. Uh, we know, or we cannot have an idea of where we're going to. And this is why John Brierley, and Gemma, his daughter, may be listening in and is very welcome if so. This is why John Brierley said, you should walk with an open mind and an open heart. And the Zen master, in that tradition, asked the young monk who was passing his door, what is the matter of your pilgrimage motive? And the young monk said, I don't know. I pilgrimage aimlessly. And the Zen master said, not knowing is the greatest intimacy. And at that moment, the young monk experienced enlightenment. A little bit about Camino Companions from the book and my own knowledge. It was set up, and I think this year will be its 10th anniversary. It was the idea, I think, principally of Catherine O'Flynn, supported in the initial stages, fully supported, indeed today, by the FCJ sisters, but in the initial stages, supported specifically by Marion Dooley. The Camino, the authors of this book explain, is God's dream for the world. The Camino is the way life should be. It's not to be a few weeks of exception, a brief experience of living absolutely poetically, and then a return to prosaic life, to dull prose. It's not intended to be that. And however, it's intended on the contrary to indicate to us how we should live our ordinary lives. Camino companions realized that many experience anticlimax, disappointment, a sense of potential loss on reaching Santiago. So how to help them? The idea of Camino companions is deceptively simple. It's three-leaved in my estimation of it, like the shamrock. First, hospitality. Secondly, real listening. And finally, thirdly, some help in staying connected with the Camino and the values of the Camino on return home, which of course is what this book is all about. Um, in relation to hospitality, the hospitality is the hospitality of the Celtic welcome to the stranger, or the Benedictine welcome, and it's the welcome of cultures all over the world. There is the simple ritual of tea and coffee being offered. The stranger, the visitor, is welcome as bringing great and wonderful gifts, and the tea and the coffee and the warmth of welcome are a symbolic return of this gift, of the stranger's presence, and a promise to them, on the other hand, of the gift of listening. There isn't, in my view, in my experience of Camino companions, that duality that you might perceive. The listening can be speaking. There is the giving and the receiving all at the same time. There can be hospitality, indeed, from the guest to the hosts. This is very far from the idea of the provision of hospitality services to the tourist and the consumption of those services. The listening and the speaking is all the one, and is quite profound to experience. Then there's the active listening, and a little more about that. There is the open question, which imposes nothing, suggests nothing, and takes nothing from the speaker. The question is open. And the great open question, the example of this is that simple word, why? I fully accept that can be an aggressive word. It can be an intrusive word, but when asked with warmth and open arms, why? It can be wonderful. It's about inviting a person to say whatever they want to say or need to say, and it carries this simple word, openly spoken with open arms. Why? It carries the assurance to you, you will be listened to, whatever you have to say. And I think the Gaelic syntax is helpful here. Although we can say in the Irish language or Gaelic, we can say, listen to me, we don't. We actually say, éist lum, listen with me. Listen with me. I think that's a key to understanding the listening that occurs in room 6. We listen with each other. Speaking, listening, it's all the one. The listening with is the speaking to. In an interesting, I think, profound way. And there you have it. The key to the endeavor of Camino companions, and so supported by the FCJ sisters. The safe space, the space held for this to occur, the hospitality and the listening. And it occurs in a circle, horizontally, therefore, not hierarchically, just the way the Camino functions. And I would leave it there, because what happens in the Camino office is precious. It's the beginning, as the authors say, of a process. The pilgrims, the authors say, should never ever doubt the importance of what has happened to them, or what is happening within them. And it's happening in the room also. The experience, the pilgrim experience, say Katherine and Brendan, should be trusted even in the face of these enemies, apathy, cynicism, and begrudging secularism. And it should be trusted indeed. Something is happening, and it is to be allowed to happen. But on the way down the stairs, the thought which occurs on the stairs, the thought which occurs on the passage home, the thoughts that occur at home, how is the pilgrim to be helped to keep the experience alive? And this is the third leaf. How to help to keep the experience alive. The first two leaves, the hospitality, that precious hospitality and the listening. But the third leaf of the shamrock idea is how to keep the Camino alive. A great concern of our great friend John Brierley, and answered so ably, so persuasively in this book. How do you keep the experience alive? First, let's the authors help us to understand what that experience in fact is, and then move, particularly with Ignatian philosophy and Ignatian tools, explain to us how to keep that experience alive. The experience, they say, is radical simplicity, solidarity, deep humanity, and the result is joy. There is no pretense or hierarchy. I would digress to say, in my view, hierarchy is pretense, or at least survives with the help of it on every side. But that's a digression. Connections happen very fast. Conversations are open and sincere. Emotions are expressed. Vulnerability is shared. And here again is another example of why the Camino is not a hierarchical decision or a hierarchical situation. It's proof of the non-hierarchical system on the Camino, which miraculously delivers pilgrim after pilgrim together and alone to Santiago. You don't find this sort of discourse in the hierarchical system, where communication is usually only from the top down, and usually only in the form of pronouncement, instruction, or direct order, to the great loss of community. A huge loss to those apparently on the top, those on the middle, and those perceived to be on the bottom. So this is also, there is to be found the experience in nature, the simplicity of tiny flowers, even ants. There is the experience of letting go. There's the experience of triumphing over the challenging moments, testing the limits of patience and courage. And they quote Augustine in explaining how powerful the experience is. We burn for its peace, Augustine said. So finally, how to bring it home? Well, the authors provide wonderful assistance here. First, never doubt the importance of what happened and is happening. Allow it to be, perhaps with a spiritual director or soul friend, the Anam Cara, begin the process of discernment. The great insight they give us here is this Jesuit skill, tradition, insight of discernment. I wish I had known about it earlier. And the great insight in relation to discernment of choices that we all make every day, the great insight they give us is that the choice which leads to life is the choice to make. I'm grateful for that insight amongst the many insights this book delivers. Choose life. This seems to be the foundation stone of the process of discernment. Keep on the move. And the mind and body are one. As the mind moves, as the body moves, the mind will also. Sore muscles are for a day, they say, but beauty lasts forever. And see the early sunrise. And a surprise to me, it is available. I'm going to make an attempt to experience, more attempts to experience it. Possessions do not bring happiness, of course, and they set that out. Start, therefore, to declutter. And incidentally, as you declutter possessions, declutter ideas of status, I think. Declutter the idea that you are better than anyone and that anyone is better than you. Get rid of that from your bag. It's useless. It's worse than useless. It blocks. Have a heart that sings and be around people who have full lives and who are not cynical. Focus on the path ahead, just one step we need to take without overthinking things. See yourself as belonging, as you did on the community, to something bigger than family, even, or town, even, or even country. Encourage that within yourself and do the examen, the other Jesuit technique, which leads also to journaling, I think. These are wonderful insights, and there are more in this great book. So without more ado, I wish to thank Camino Companions for the idea of being Camino Companions and for holding what is a sacred space in room 6. Particular thanks to Katherine, Marion, and all the sisters of the FCJs for this wonderful idea, but for holding it with such strength and integrity and commitment, and to Brendan for, and I think, a wonderful introduction to these Jesuit ideas of discernment, the examen, and the deployment of those to analyze how you can bring the Camino home. It's an honor for me to launch this great book with brothers and sisters gathered around from all over the world. And it reminds me of how I used to launch boats. At the moment, immediately after launching a boat, no matter how prepared, no matter how well cared for, there's always a moment of great silence as we wonder, will it float? And there's a pause, and when it floats, there's a huge relief and often a cheer. 3 cheers for this little boat. It floats. It floats magnificently, and it will float and carry us on many life-giving and life-enhancing adventures if we allow it to.
Thank you so much, Turlough. That was really engaging, really interesting. I love that imagery of the shamrock and the 3 prongs, and oh, it was great. Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
Um, so now we're going to come to a question and answer kind of session with our authors, give them a chance to talk to the book and to the themes elaborated upon so well by Turlough. I'm just gonna, so feel free to type a message into the chat bar there, and I'll be looking at that and try and incorporate as many questions as people have. I'll start the ball rolling and ask, I suppose, a question, and I'll direct this to you, Katherine, if that's okay. So because it concerns the work of the Camino companions. This work is obviously central to the book. What led to you setting it up in the first place, and what does it provide? You talk to us about what the Camino companions provide for pilgrims.
Well, I think true to Ignatian life, which Turlough has mentioned very beautifully, my own experience, and I think the experience of many pilgrims, is what has led to the setting up of Camino Companions. I walked the Camino in 2014, and I worked for a while in the chaplaincy at the cathedral, which was then set up by a well-known figure on the Camino, Johnny Walker Santiago, or Aka Johnny Raftery. And I realized people wanted to talk. They wanted to share. There had been some profound sharing and talking on the Camino. But when people got to Santiago, there wasn't the same space or sometimes even opportunity for that. Because people were suddenly flying home, getting trains, or staying in different places in a city where a lot of other life is also happening. So it became clear that offering an opportunity and a space to pilgrims where they could meet with other pilgrims and feel they were being held and listened to. And that was basically what led to the setting up of Camino Companions. So as Turlough said already, we provide that opportunity. We provide 2 sessions in particular in a formal way twice a day. One which happens immediately after the Mass in the chapel in English each morning. It's about 11:30. And pilgrims come up, they talk about their experiences in that circle, which Turlough has so wonderfully described, where they're free to say what they want and free to be as open as they choose. And that sharing circle, as people call it, often continues for about an hour, perhaps more, depending on the numbers. And then we have a similar experience in the afternoon where we have a formal sharing session. And again, people share to the degree to which they feel comfortable. And in between times, people arrive at the door, they drop in and they say, can I come in? And sometimes people want to talk to one person, people who maybe have a very kind of personal experience they want to share. And we also provide that because many of our volunteers are trained, either spiritual directors, counselors. So we provide just a brief session. Obviously, we're not taking on people on counseling for a long term, but just giving them a moment to open up and share, and then often encouraging them maybe to continue doing that when they go home. Does that give you a sense of what?
Yeah, and it's something that I wouldn't have thought of actually, but you're quite right. You're in the middle of the Camino, and that's time you're sharing. You're probably out in nature, you're not surrounded by many, many people in a busy city. But then when you come in and you've still got the feelings, but nowhere to go with them, I suppose. So yes, thank you very much indeed. You really answered that very comprehensively. And Brendan, I'd like to come to you now, if that's okay. You've also worked with the companions, the Camino companions. Um, what is it about the pilgrims coming to you that motivated you to write the book with Catherine?
Yeah, thanks, Carolanne. I mean, obviously, I'm a bit of a Camino fanatic myself, and
Mm.
I've done the Camino a number of times, and I've had some extraordinary experiences, and I think everybody does. But I remember especially 2011 when my brother had died by suicide, and I walked the Camino in memory of him. And I had an extraordinary experience at the very end in Finisterre, actually, on the coast. And it was a real cathartic kind of meltdown, but it was just exactly what I needed, you know? The Camino gave me this thing that no other kind of counseling or no other support groups could help me with. The Camino just did something extraordinary for me. So my theory is that everybody has something extraordinary going on for them in their lives, you know, and the Camino has this potential to deliver this extraordinary thing for people. But I think you need some kind of framework in order to hold it. That's what the Camino Companions is the beginning of. And then I think you need to bring that back home. It took me a full year to understand what had happened on the Camino. It sounds crazy, you know, in our life of kind of instantaneous and short, sharp experiences, you know, but the Camino delivers something really deep and profound. But I think you have to really work it and kind of dig into it and uncover the riches of it. You know, there's something really significant that's happening. A bit like what Catherine just said, and the people coming in often they need to talk about this really significant thing that has happened. And I would claim that it's an experience of the gospel, you know. I mean, people might not put that word on it, but it's an experience of something really profound that has touched them, healed people, has given them sense and meaning and purpose. But it's something sometimes it's so ordinary that you kind of miss it, you know? And sometimes it doesn't seem that significant. And sometimes our society is kind of tilted against that. It doesn't value kind of interior work and spiritual movements and significant things that go on in people's lives. So in order to help people to process all of that, and people coming into Santiago are just at the beginning of that experience. The Camino is over. The Camino is like, call it like being on cocaine, you know. I'm not recommending drug use here, but it's that kind of experience. It's an extraordinary transformational experience. And then it suddenly ends, and people are looking around to see what we should do and how can I keep this going? So obviously, Camino Companions provides that container, but then we need to do that work back at home to provide the kind of structures and supports that people are going to need. That's what I would see it's all about.
Great, great. Well, thank you very much, Brendan. Can I just take an opportunity to say, somebody has just said that the chat is disabled. Now that shouldn't be the case. But what I'll do, and what I recommend to people is, rather than, delay us here, I'm going to redirect you to the Q&A, where there are some comments and questions. So that's, if you can maybe type your question, excuse me, in there rather than the chat, and I'll explore what happened to the chat at a later stage. Um, so we have some um, we have some comments in here. There's one question I'd like to ask first before we get to these questions. And it's to do with the Ignatian charism. Both of you come from Ignatian orders. And I'd like to put to, I suppose, both of you, but initially, Catherine, what's unique about Ignatian spirituality for pilgrims? What does it offer pilgrims, do you think, in your view?
Well, I suppose the first thing that comes to mind, Carolanne, is that Ignatius called himself a pilgrim.
Okay.
And I think he lived with that pilgrim attitude. We know he set off walking from, the Basque Country, from his own home over to Manresa, and then eventually walked to Paris and walked back again to Spain, and walked all over Europe, in fact. But I think the attitude of the pilgrim, obviously, it's shared by many others outside of Ignatian spirituality, but I think it's very key to that Ignatian attitude, that we're here, we're always moving on, we're traveling lightly. And then the discernment that Turlough has already touched on, I think that's very key. We're making choices. And, even on the Camino, we've got to make choices every day, though the arrows guide us. We're making choices about who we walk with, what we eat, where we sleep overnight. And obviously, the bigger choices that go on in all our lives that we need to reflect about. And I think Ignatian discernment helps the pilgrim to choose life at the end of the Camino. What is it going forward that will really give me a sense of being fully alive as a human being? Because so many of us get caught into the consumer world where we define ourselves by our possessions, by our status, by external things. And that inner journey that ultimately is what gives us meaning and peace and joy, that often gets forgotten or isn't even touched upon by people, sadly. So I think the other Ignatian phrase that we often use, finding God in all things. And the Camino provides a wonderful opportunity for finding God everywhere. Like there's no way on the Camino that God is confined into the very lovely little chapels and churches you'll pass. God is there all the time, in the encounters with other pilgrims. Pilgrims are often very moved by the generosity of others, seeing people give up a bed for another pilgrim who arrives at the last minute and needs the bed for the night, seeing pilgrims share their last bottle of water with somebody who needs it more. But I think it's finding God in all of that, finding God in the beauty, and there are some very beautiful parts of all the Caminos, finding God in my own experience, the Spirit moving within me and trying to identify what that Spirit is really saying. So, discernment, finding God, being a pilgrim. And then that sense of the kingdom. I always believe that the Camino gives us a taste of the kingdom of God and gives us, therefore, a sense of wanting to be more part of that kingdom and wanting to live the kind of values of the gospel, the kingdom of God, the values of justice and the values of love, the values of peace, the values of generosity, the values of hospitality. So I think Ignatian spirituality for me, and then of course, let me not forget the examen, which provides that wonderful tool at the end of the day to look back and see where has God been at work in my life. But I've said enough. There's another expert on Ignatian spirituality who works more directly at it. And I'm sure Brendan might have lots to offer on this if I haven't stolen all his thunder.
No, thank you, Catherine. Yeah, it's beautiful. We both come from the same Ignatian tradition, so we both see I think that was the key to writing the book together. But I think you've covered it really well. I would just add there's this key thing about God, or some people struggle with the word God, but the divine or mystery is the word that I love because mystery defines the Camino for me. There's this openness, there's this extraordinary thing going on. But God or mystery is always trying to reach us, is always trying to communicate with us. And on the Camino, you are open, you're open to that communication. So there's silence, there's being in nature. There's that kind of solitude. There's the being away from technology is one of the key things. Being kind of cut off in a sense leaves us open. But that same communication is always there. That same potential to have that, even though we live in like urbanized societies and consumerism and loads of technology, but you can still choose. I always say to people, you can choose about how you're going to live your life here. And there are certain things that you can put in place that are going to help you to live this more profound, more meaningful, more tuned into the mystery of the divine in your life. Like Catherine says, the examen is this Ignatian technique is widely available if you just Google it, but it outlines just in 5 steps, a very simple 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the day. And it just simply looks back. This thing about reflection as the Ignatian thing, you have an experience like the Camino and you look back at it and you examine it and you see it from a bit of a distance and you can see it much more clearly. The same thing applies to our day, our lives. If you sit back at the end of the day, you can see things you didn't notice before. So this sense that we are all pilgrims, and we're pilgrims in the world, regardless whether you can see that or not, or it feels like that. We're pilgrims. We're traveling through. You only get one chance at this life, and we have to travel light, and we have to try to make the best decisions we can. We have to try to tune in. We have to try to be present to those that are around us, especially people that are suffering and in trouble. And that's always true. There's always somebody that needs us. Thing that Turlough mentioned about listening is this sounds paradoxical, but listening is one of the key things to listen to what's going on inside myself, to listen what's going on in other people in the world, to be able to have a space or a silence. So creating these little oases of silence during the day can be really helpful. And that thing about being a pilgrim and living life as a pilgrim, but we need structures for that. So the book does outline in quite a bit of detail, especially at the end section. It says these are the things we recommend. So being part of a group like a Camino group or a support group or a listening group, that examine thing is key. Having someone to listen to you. So what Turlough mentioned about the soul friend or the spiritual director is a technical word or a guide, but just to have someone to listen to you, not just someone who's gonna tell you what they think themselves, not just like a friend, but somebody that's trained to listen, will give you space and will help you reveal the desires of your heart. because it's all about following your deepest desires. What Ignatius says, that is where God is. That links to what Turlough says about it's about life, choosing life. Sometimes these are tough decisions, and sometimes we have to decide we have to turn other things down in order to do the one thing that's going to bring us this life and happiness. So something like that. I think I don't want to get too carried away here.
Well, thank you so much, Brendan and Catherine. I really have to say, I'm really struck by the animation of both of your answers. You know, your energy levels just really kind of jumped when I mentioned the Ignatian charism. So that was really obvious. I'm going to turn now to some of the comments and questions in the Q&A. First of all, Pat Holland, thank you, has said to thank the Camino Companions for their work. He's seen it and he thinks they're doing a great job. That's a positive affirmation there. There's a number of comments and questions. Deborah here says that she's chapter coordinator of the American Pilgrims on the Camino. These are all following a similar theme. How do we facilitate the continuation once we return home? Teresa says that she crashed after coming home for almost a year. Will this book help the depression and the experience to reignite the experience? Rob O'Byrne is the same. Number one tip to maintain the spirit of the Camino once you're back home. So many of us return, and this is really the core of the book. So many of us return to the Camino time and time again to reignite the feelings and the emotions, rather than having the facility to integrate it into your, I suppose, daily life and your everyday life. I'm just going to check. Yeah, so maybe you want to start having a look a stab at answering that. The whole aspect of coming home, bringing it home. Yeah, Brendan, do you want to have a start on that?
Yeah, I think there's just that first one about the American Pilgrims. I think that thing about providing a space, I think
Mm.
is key. Just like Catherine was saying about the Camino Companions, that style of a listening space. One of the key Ignatian techniques, this thing is called spiritual conversation, and it just means simply that people are allowed to talk about their experience. Just like Turlough says, everybody's experience is valid, but it's different. Everybody has a different experience. And one of the things I find, man, because this is my job, obviously, I try to help people to talk about what's important. But one of the problems is, especially in a group context, that other people tend to want to give advice, or tend to want to fix people. And that's the death of people sharing openly and honestly. So you need to create a kind of a boundary safe space where people can talk about their experience, whatever that is, and not be interrupted. So there is a very specific technique. It's called the Ignatian spiritual conversation, as I say. So having that particular conversation in a group where people feel safe, where they can really open up, that's what's helpful, to help people to process their own experience. And it does take time, and people need a lot of processing time with that. The other thing I recommend, what I think it was Turlough said about journaling, which is just simply writing up what has been significant. And one of the other things, obviously, writing about your Camino experience can be enormously helpful. And it takes a while to process that and to write it. And I mean, it took me a year, like I said, and then I wrote a book based on that, what I had come up with. That was enormously fulfilling, but a lot of work in that, obviously, but a lot of processing, understanding the experience, what's happened, what's come up. So that's what I would suggest just on that first question.
Thank you very much. I'm going to pass it over to Catherine as well. Catherine, what would be your maybe top tips for Camino walkers returning home um to bring that experience, to bring that mysticism maybe with them. How do they apply?
There's a lovely phrase that people on the Camino regularly use: the Camino provides. And that is because they suddenly find themselves lost, and out of the blue, somebody comes and shows them the way, or they don't find a place to sleep for the night, and suddenly somebody provides a bed or a mat on the floor. And, all sorts of examples. abound, people will share with you. And I believe, the Camino in Spanish means the way, and Jesus is the way. And I think this is a very spiritual comment, though I'm not sure pilgrims always make it in that context, but that God will provide for us. And I think if we can only live our lives in that way of trusting that God will provide, and I don't mean it in an airy-fairy way, I mean it in a very deep kind of sense that, God is there in our lives. And developing that sense of the connection with, as Brendan said earlier, with the mystery, and somehow engaging with that mystery in our lives. It may be developing a capacity to pray or some form of meditation. And for some people, it may just be going for a simple, quiet walk for 15 minutes, but just having the space to really touch into that inner journey. I think it was Dag Hammarskjöld who said years ago, the longest journey is the journey inwards. I think trying to give space and time to that inner journey in our lives will help us to bring that wonderful, as you said, mysticism, that wonderful joy of the Camino. Another tremendous and very simple practice, but one that's quite hard, I think, is just developing an attitude of gratitude. I think it was Meister Eckhart said, if there's only one prayer in your life, and that is thank you, that's enough. And I think becoming grateful no matter what is going on for us, we have that lovely thing, count your blessings. And on the Camino, somehow or other, there's a tremendous encouragement to count your blessings and to become grateful. So I think there are two other tips that we can, I suppose, develop, ponder, so that they become more part of our lives, moving us away from that cynical, controlling consumer world where, there's such a focus on externals.
Yeah, so you're really talking, about stripping away, coming down to the essence, really. Very simple in a way, but not always easy to achieve, particularly in our world where we've moved very far. Many of us have moved very far away from the ability to connect with ourselves like that. I'm going to go back now and read a couple. Actually, Nadia says, thank you for this. Nadia's in Canada. I lead a chapter of the Canadian Company of Pilgrims. Can this book be used in a hands-on way to lead a post-Camino discussion group? If so, how? And she says, thank you very much, and compliments your speaking. So, yeah, I would suggest, yes, this is a very practical hands-on book, but I'm going to allow you to maybe, Brendan, would you start talking about how this, in what way this can be used, and can it be used with a
Sure.
post group?
Yeah, sure. Just to say, first of all, like this book was born out of an experience. Obviously, I was working in the Camino Companions 2 years ago with Katherine. Actually, we just happened to overlap, and that was a fantastic experience. And I remember being there, and we were thinking we need something to give to people. We started working on some handouts, and basically those handouts became the book. The practical tips that we wanted to give to the pilgrims, to say this is what might be helpful to do when you go back. So it's all there. It's the handouts are actually physically in the back of the book, almost in the same form as we give them out in Santiago. So really really practical. But I think it gives the structures is the key thing. It gives you this is like practically what would be helpful to do for pilgrims coming back home. So it suggests there's individual work that you need to do, and that's where the examine comes in, and the reflection and the journaling and the writing. That's one thing, but obviously you need the communal support. So we need some kind of group activity, and that thing I said about the spiritual conversation, the listening. There's a certain way of setting up that group in such a way that's going to be helpful, and helping people to process their experience. That, like I say, really significant things have happened, and helping people to put that into some kind of shape, and then working on that, and then developing that. And then the key thing is always, what does this mean for my life, you know? So it's gotta boil down into some kind of practical decisions. Bit like what Catherine said about, living simply, living in a more decluttered way. More contact with nature is one of the key things, to be out there in nature. Like Turlough was saying, like the sunrise happens every morning. On the Camino, you happen to see it, but it's still there, the world is still there. And we just gotta decide. You gotta make different decisions, deciding to live in a different way, like a pilgrim. And that means, simplicity. That means trying to move away from technology. Technology is a great tool, but it's a desperate master, So not being a slave to technology. So all these kind of decisions have to kind of come out of that kind of a personal process and a communal process. So it has to be focused on that, trying to decide how we're gonna live our lives differently in order to keep that Camino spirit alive. That's the way that I would see it. It's always there for us, that kind of joy and that as and you can't buy it. That's the irony of it. It's all free, you know.
Absolutely. And I mean, it just occurs to me as you're saying this, and maybe Catherine, you might have a think about this, that, living like a pilgrim, you said, Brendan, and that's the key, isn't it? Coming back to your essence, trying to d discard the excess. But all of that is very much embedded in our lives. Would you say that it's harder to be a pilgrim at home as such than it is in the surroundings of the Camino, where I suppose everybody is on a similar journey, and are supporting each other? That's not always the case in our home environment.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Carolanne. I think it is much, much harder. And like, I think this is why people keep coming back on the Camino because, they discovered something people will say magical, mystical, very special. And they want that. But it is so hard to keep that alive when you go home. Now, obviously, there are aspects of the Camino that one can't pretend one could recreate back in the middle of London or Dublin or, Sligo or wherever one lives. But I think the deeper underlying attitudes that are part of the Camino, what we've been talking about, developing that sense of being a pilgrim, developing that capacity to enjoy nature, to be grateful, developing that effort to see God in everything, and then using the tools of discernment and the examine and reflection. I think those are the tools that we need. But the Camino, you see, everybody's on the same journey there. And there is a tremendous camaraderie. And even people who come on the Camino for, maybe just a good walk because it's got a good infrastructure, they're often touched by the experience of other people. But everybody, as I say, is kind of a bit single-minded when they're there. And obviously, when you go home, people are gone in several different directions and being pulled and dragged by lots of other things. And I think it is much harder, but I think some of the ideas that have come up, such as belonging to, a chapter, as they have very much in the US and Canada, the Irish Camino Society, they do regular walks. I'm quite sure the conversations that develop there as people are walking across, the bog or, along by the Boyne or out in the Dublin Mountains, wherever people are walking, that can facilitate a way of staying connected with that great sense of the Camino feeling, which is what people, really seek. And but so there's the group aspect, I think, that can be fostered when you come home.
Yeah, and many people, or a number of people here, have asked about, are there groups that we can link in with like that? I have to laugh as well. Nancy has just mentioned, having walked and led many caminos, I highly suggest using this book along with Brendan's earlier book. Do you remember Contemplating the Camino? Um, which is a booklet just, I suppose during the Camino journey. And Nancy says they're an excellent way to approach and continue before and after. Um, so, yeah, I think we've kind of covered a lot of the questions. A lot of them are, kind of similar in insofar as, how do we bring it? How do we maintain it? Um, but I'm just conscious of the time now, and we're coming up to 8 o'clock. Um, where did the time go? Um, so I'm going to bring our evening to a close. Um, I have a couple of people have asked about purchasing the book. A number of people have asked about purchasing the book. We don't ship to the United States and Canada for price reasons, actually. It's prohibitively expensive. So our distributors in the United States and Canada for the book are Casemate Publishing. So if you were to contact them, it's also going to be available on Amazon. Um, I think around the 5th, I think Brendan said the 5th of December.
December.
Yeah, that's always a little bit of a delay. Somebody else asked about, bookshops in Ireland. And that should be an easy question. It should be in good bookshops. But our Irish attendees may be aware that Veritas, which would be one of the bigger, well, the biggest, I suppose, religious bookshop chain, is closing down. So I would suggest for people, if they're particularly interested in the book, it's available on our own website. For people in the Ireland, the UK, and Europe. Um, and that's, I suppose, the easiest way and the swiftest way to get it. So that's about purchasing the book. I'd like to thank Katherine, Brendan, and Turlough. They've all given us some really astute insights into the book and how we can bottle the learnings and the insights, the enrichment that walking the Camino as a pilgrim can bring, and most importantly, how to integrate that into our busy and sometimes stressful everyday life when we have little time to meditate and to reflect and maybe to embrace our natural surroundings. So thank you all three for a really rewarding hour this evening, and Brendan and Katherine for writing the booklet. Um, and just before we go, I'll just observe that we're offering to celebrate the launch. There's a 20% discount on the book for purchases of two or more of them, and that's live on our website right now. So if people are interested, go to the website and place your order. There's also a special offer on one of the other books I mentioned that Brendan co-wrote with Jim Deeds, the Mess trilogy. We're selling the three books as a package called the Mess trilogy, and there's a special offer on that. So that's on the website as well. And just a very kind of, I suppose, administrative thing about orders and deliveries, just to alert people. Messenger Publications are actually moving offices next week after 60 years, 60 plus years in our current premises in Leeson Street. We're moving to the Jesuit Provincialate offices in Milltown. So we're going to join other Jesuit affiliate organisations and staff. But as a result, our offices will be closed for a couple of days towards the end of next week, from the 20th to the 22nd. So you may want to get your orders in quickly so we can, get them processed and dispatched before we shut shop and relocate. Now we will be obviously opening again back on the 25th. So that's the admin stuff done. I would like to thank Turlough O'Donnell most sincerely for his absolutely fabulous contribution this evening as well. I think we found it really enriching and engaging. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining us tonight. I hope you've all enjoyed the lunch. I think we've all had a very stimulating time. And we've all had the benefit that we didn't even have to set a foot outside into the cold, dark night. So thank you all very much indeed. And as I said, I will send on the recording when it becomes available. But I'll wrap up now for this evening, and I'll say good night and goodbye to you all. Cheerio.
Mhm.